Well, I certainly hope that people can better understand how our criminal justice system isn't working very effectively or efficiently, what can be done to use research-based practices to help reduce recidivism, provide appropriate treatment, programming, rehabilitation for those persons who should be receiving that and are returning to the community, and those that stay in the community as well, and then to learn how to use that information in their jobs and advocate for that in their communities and in our state. Well, I think that in part it sort of refreshes their recollection about many of the things that they've had to learn and that they use in their different jobs. But I think more it helps enhance the collaboration that's necessary between our justice system partners, and treatment providers and social workers are absolutely part of that system on a regular basis. And what I wanted to do was give them the judicial perspective, what we know, what we've been doing, and how we need to change to better collaborate, share information, so we can produce a better outcome for people. I hope to continue to be able to work with the evidence-based and research-based practices movement here in Eau Claire County. I've belonged to a number of statewide committees, and I'm trying to work on incorporating them statewide through the justice system. I have the opportunity through the Judicial College to start educating judges more about this. And work collaboratively with the Department of Corrections through the Offender Reentry Council, and even nationally, attending conferences, speaking when asked to do so, sharing the information, trying to convince people what works and what we need to change it. So it's a great opportunity for me, and something I find very rewarding.
I'm going to be talking about improving our justice system, but specifically, of course, the criminal justice system, that system that incarcerates and supervises people for violation of state or federal statute. And in other words, for me, talk about stopping the revolving door. My background was in civil litigation, and I tried cases representing professionals, automobile accident cases, some commercial litigation for 18 years before I took the bench. I never handled a criminal case. And so when I took the bench, I had a steep learning curve for a while, but within about 2 years of doing that, I kept seeing the same people over and over. And not just them, but family members, children, other relatives, grandchildren. And I kept thinking, this isn't working. What we're doing is not working. We needed to make some changes. And that is what led me to start looking into the treatment courts, drug court. We also have an AIM court here, and we'll talk a little bit about those in a while, mental health court and a veterans court. And it also started me researching and looking into evidence-based decision-making in the justice system, because I felt that we were over-incarcerating people, we weren't treating them properly, and we didn't have any idea about what to do to stop that revolving door. So I'm going to talk with you about the judicial perspective about this issue, why we are where we are, in my opinion, in the justice system, and what we need to do to change and how to go about trying to do that. So today we're going to, when you leave here, you should be able to better understand why the current justice system does not effectively change behavior, reduce recidivism, and increase safety. And I submit to you those are 3 significant goals our justice system should meet. You should be able to understand the changes that have to be made to the justice system to achieve those goals and how they can be accomplished. And then you should have a little bit of a better idea about how to advocate yourselves for expansion of evidence-based practices and resources in your community and in your jobs. Our current system is creating a legion of unemployable, unproductive citizens. You may not know this, but if you're charged with a criminal offense, whether you're convicted or it's dismissed, there's this website out there, the Court Computer Automated Program, which lists all of your names if you've ever had any type of contact with law enforcement, even a speeding ticket, and it tells the resolution of those. So people who are hiring people go out there and look at those. People who are going to rent to people, go out there and look at those. People who are going to loan money to people, go out there and look at those websites. And so people can't get jobs, they can't rent houses, they can't get loans. And of course, when you can't do that, you are winding up unproductive and unable to care for yourself and your families. You can't keep your professional licenses on many occasions. You can't get professional licenses on many occasions. People write to me all the time. I was 18, I stole something from Walmart, and now I'm 30, I want to get my nursing degree. And it was reduced to an ordinance violation, but my nursing examination licensing entity has serious concerns about whether I'm fit and whether I can qualify. Ordinance is a civil violation, not a criminal violation, but they were charged with the crime initially. I can't expunge those. They're there for a very, very long time. Just one small example of the impact the criminal justice system has, and of course if you're convicted of a crime, even more significant. It divides families. It has this revolving door that I talked about before. It's bankrupting us financially, and it is not enhancing our community safety. A few statistics I have here will, I think, help support what my position is on this, but I have a caveat on this. Statistics are like a bikini. What they reveal is suggestive, and what they conceal is vital. And 98% of all statistics are made up. So with that, I want to talk a little bit, first of all, about just nationally. You may have seen in the last year or two, there was a Pew study that was the topic of headlines in our newspapers. 1% of all adult Americans are behind bars, 1 out of 100 people. 1 of every 31 adults in our nation is under some form of correctional control. Probation, diversion agreements, jail, extended supervision, prison. 1 out of 31. I think that's frightening. I think in Wisconsin the number was 1 out of 39. Our national prison population has almost tripled in the last 20 years. And we put people away thinking we're tough on crime, but 95% of the people we incarcerate are coming back out. And about 2/3 of those people will commit new crimes within 3 years. So what we're doing isn't working. This is a revolving door, and clearly you can see it's going to be dividing families. 76% of the defendants arrested had at least, that's here in Wisconsin, had at least 1 prior arrest. Here in Wisconsin, 46% of our Wisconsin inmates return to prison within 3 years. Now the Department of Corrections says that's 39%, but that's 39% for new crimes. A lot of people go back to prison for violation of their supervision rules that don't necessarily involve the commission of new offenses. And you can see some of the other statistics here. Of this, 55% of the defendants ages 17 to 21 released from prison in 2005 that were reincarcerated within 2 years, the majority of them come from 3 districts in the city of Milwaukee, where they have almost 100% unemployment, and they have virtually nothing to go back to except the same social issues they left and brought them there in the first place. The length of supervision in our system has doubled from 2000 to 2007. And does anybody have any idea why that is? 3 words: truth in sentencing. Everybody wanted to implement truth in sentencing because they didn't like the fact that people had a parole board and that they could go to that board and ask for release somewhere after serving 25 to 75% of their sentence. And so we wanted to know, when a judge said you were going to get 3 years incarceration and 3 years extended supervision, you were going to serve that time. But what happens is, if someone's put in prison for 3 years, then they get out for 2 years and they do fine, and then all of a sudden they are reincarcerated, they don't get time, they don't get credit for the time they were out. So that 6-year prison sentence now winds up being an additional 2 years because they were under supervision that time, and they get sent back to prison for up to the remaining time on their sentence, which is 3 years. So I order 6, they could wind up serving 8 or 9. Or if they get in and out, much longer than that. So sentences have doubled as a result of truth in sentencing. And of course, we've all read about the devastating impact on minority populations. We currently in Wisconsin have 36 adult correctional facilities, which are 20 prisons and 16 correctional centers. We have capacity for about 18,000 people. As you can see, we have a lot of overcrowding. Our prison admissions in 2008, and I think they have increased until about last year when they've tended to remain relatively stable, for about 14,000 to 15,000 a year. And this is the amount of money we spend as of last year to house inmates. So we would be, in my opinion, much better using our resources if we were educating people than spending $32,000 a year to house them, and that's really what we're doing there. Part of the reason is that attitude in Wisconsin. Part of the reason we have this issue is because lots of our work with people who are incarcerated is centralized rather than keeping people in their communities. And part of it is because we aren't using our research to drive what we're doing. You've probably also heard about Minnesota and their experience, and I'm not going to give you all the statistics related to that, but just generally speaking, they are comparable to us in population size and demographic, and they have a third of the number of people in their prison system. Because about 25 to 30 years ago, Minnesota made a decision to try to do what they could to enhance treatment and keep people in the community. And they gave counties tax incentives to do that and create programming. So today, if you look at the nature of the treatment that's available to drug and alcohol addicted people in Minnesota versus here, or mentally ill people in Minnesota versus here, you'll see a significant difference. And that's because of the philosophical difference they have with Wisconsin's attitude and how we've handled things. I want you to tell me, what do you think are the purposes of sentencing? And sentencing, of course, is of course what puts people in the justice system, in the prison system at least, or in incarceration. Anybody, what do you think are the purposes? If you're the judge, what are you thinking about? What are your goals when you're sentencing somebody? And I flipped on the other screen so you had a hint if you read quickly. Anybody?
Public safety.
Okay, I'm going to write these down, although I don't write down. Oops. All right. Safety. So you're trying to keep people from committing new offenses, keep them from harming themselves and others. Punishment, absolutely. Anybody else? Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, retribution, all that goes with the punishment theory. Anybody else?
Well, one went forward, treatment.
Treatment, rehabilitation, all right. Gives us a chance to supervise to make sure that that person's doing what they need to do and doing it effectively, so hopefully they won't be back again. Absolutely. Anyone else? Yes?
Provide them with different choices than they had before they were incarcerated.
So does that kind of fit within rehabilitation?
I suppose, but maybe we should drop the re on that.
Habilitate.
Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely. Have better opportunities, maybe educate them additionally so they help them with wraparound services so when they come back to the community, they're in a better position to be successful. All right.
Like that, yeah.
Anybody else? What about advice? Go ahead.
I'd like to make an example of somebody that committed a crime so that the community can see that things are being done.
Okay. So a deterrence?
Yeah.
Deterrent factor? So if I know that you went out and stole a car and you wound up getting 3 years in prison, I better not go out and steal that car because I know that's likely how I'm going to be treated. And it makes the community feel better that, wow, people are taking action to make sure my stuff is protected. Anybody else?
Political pressure, perhaps?
Okay. That's a very good point. As a judge, I can tell you that you worry about what the press writes about your sentences, and you are subject to public scrutiny and election. I can tell you also, though, I would hope, but that's not a big factor in my decision making. I do know when I issue a decision that people aren't likely to like, it makes me nervous, but I still do it because that's what my oath says that I must do. But absolutely, I think that political pressure also bears on our legislators and what they choose to enact as laws. Anyone else? How about if I stole something from you? What would you hope I would do? Restitution, pay it back. So restoration, restorative justice. Those are the primary things that you would think about. Those would be your goals in issuing a sentence. So public safety, deterrence, punishment, holding the offender accountable, risk reduction, rehabilitation, reducing the likelihood they'll reoffend, and holding them accountable, victim restoration. There's no roadmap to sentencing, however. So when I took that bench in 2000, having never done any criminal work, and I did my first sentencing, and every sentencing since, there's been nothing to say to me, well, you need to, this is generally what people have sentenced people to, and this is an effective sentence for this particular period of time. I have to use my common sense, what I think are community norms, and try and weigh that crime versus the rest of the crimes. There are minimum penalties that are sometimes enacted for particular matters, and the legislature tells us the maximum penalties, but within that, it is completely within my discretion. And so I establish what I think my goal is for sentencing that particular individual, and then after that, it could be a coin toss, it could be, hopefully it's not, and it shouldn't be, but the point is there's nothing to say what I have to do. I think that roadmap is kind of scary. And so if I put someone in prison for 3 years for stealing a car, do I know that that's going to be appropriate for that individual? Or should it be 2? Or should it be 1? Or should they stay in the community? So there's nothing or hasn't been much to guide that decision making. And that's one of the improvements that I absolutely think is necessary in our justice system. So why are our current practices not effective? Because we've been focusing on the wrong issues. We give too much attention to the low risk and too little attention to the high risk offenders. Our programs have not applied research knowledge, and they're not applied correctly, and our system is not in alignment. And I think this last piece is very significant, because until the last 5 years or so, all the people in the system didn't necessarily work together. We didn't have the same goals. And that would start from law enforcement all the way up through the Department of Corrections on the back end for people who are on probation or supervision. It also is true with the 3 branches of government. The executive and the legislative branches have not used research, in my opinion, to make their decisions about what should be criminal activity and how that should be punished or treated. And let me give you an example of that. That happened just the other day. I was at the signing of several bills by Governor Walker here in Eau Claire, and I was there because I was thrilled that he was signing a Criminal Justice Collaborating Council effort on a statewide basis. It does exactly what I was hoping we would do, and that is getting the system to work in alignment by getting all of the justice system partners to talk together on a statewide basis. In my opinion, a historic thing and something I've been working for 6 years. But at the same time, he signed a bill which created an enhancer for the penalty for someone who engages in domestic violence in front of their kids. Don't get me wrong, I think that's a terrible thing, that people would engage in domestic violence first of all, and second of all in front of their kids, and it's extraordinarily damaging, and it perpetuates the system or the syndrome, I'll call it. But the problem is, enhancing the penalty, in my opinion, isn't going to do a darn thing to make a difference. Because when someone is involved in the situation of providing verbal or physical abuse to someone else, they don't stop and go, oh, my goodness, I'm doing it in front of my kids. And there's an extra enhancer to the penalty if I'm arrested for doing this. Or I'm worried that I'm going to sit 2 years rather than 1 year because I'm doing this in front of my kids. The governor expressly said this was enacted for a deterrent effect. If that's why he's doing it, it's not going to work. And backing up, one of the purposes of sentencing, which everyone thinks is really effective, is deterrence. Research shows that the severity of the offense has very little to do with the deterrent effect to persons who are criminogenic thinking or criminally thinking. We'll talk about that in a minute. The biggest deterrent effect is the likelihood of getting caught. Think about it yourselves. I'm not going to ask how many of you speed, but I'll bet you all of you at one time or another has chosen to exceed the speed limit. And you do it for a whole variety of reasons. You know, you hurry, or you just don't want to take that much time, you don't think the limit's appropriate at that particular place, or everybody else is doing it and you can get away with going 5 or 6 or 7 miles faster on the freeway. And what do you think? The likelihood of my getting caught is pretty slim. So you do it. And you know that the consequences increases your insurance, you have a penalty, you might have to go to court and fight it, what pain, it's embarrassing. So you weigh all that and you still go ahead and do it. But what happens when you're on the freeway and as you're coming over the crest of the hill, you see the trooper sitting there? Everybody slows down. And why do you slow down? Because your sense of the likelihood of getting caught has gone up dramatically. That is the deterrent, not the consequences for what you were doing. Now that isn't true for everything, but as a practical matter, for those things where you make conscious choices and conscious decisions, the actual likelihood of getting caught is far greater as a deterrent. And we use that in our treatment courts. We hold people accountable by doing random error analysis to enhance their sense of their likelihood of getting caught, rather than the deterrent factor that they have, which is knowing they could get terminated and wind up going to prison. That doesn't seem to be as effective. So we've been talking about evidence-based practices, but I wanted to read you something before I get to that. It speaks a little bit to why I don't think the system that we currently use for incarceration, particularly in the prison system, is effective. And these are the words of Judge Dennis Shalin about the prison experience. We want them to have self-worth, so we destroy their self-worth. We want them to be responsible, so we take away all their responsibility by putting them in prison. We want them to be positive and constructive, so we degrade them and make them useless. We want them to be trustworthy, so we put them where there is no trust. We want them to quit exploiting us, so we put them where they exploit each other. We want them to take control of their lives, own their problems, and quit being a parasite on us, so we make them totally dependent on us. We want them to be nonviolent, so we put them where violence is all around them. We want them to be kind and loving people, so we subject them to hatred and cruelty. We want them to quit being the tough guy, so we put them where the tough guy is respected. We want them to quit hanging around with losers, so we put all the, quote, losers, close quote, in the state under one roof. Obviously what we're doing isn't working. What he says is we need to incarcerate those people who scare us, that 3 to 5% of the people who really do need to be put away from society because they can't conform the behavior and they're never going to be able to, and they scare us. And we need to treat the others that make us mad. And I do think that's appropriate. Now, I'm not saying we don't need incarceration. That's not my message today. But what I'm saying is it needs to be used more appropriately and less frequently than what we've been doing. And if we do that, we'll have better outcomes. So, what is evidence-based practice? And you all know this from your work here, so this should be nothing new to you. But to the justice system, unfortunately, it is. And it's the progressive organizational use of a direct, current scientific evidence to guide and inform efficient and effective correctional services. And its forerunner, obviously, was evidence-based medicine, which, again, in the justice system, we never look at the symptoms, arrive at a diagnosis, then study the treatment to find out what's most effective. But, of course, that's what's been done in medicine for many years. It's professional practice supported by best research evidence through rigorous evaluation, multiple studies, and a systematic review or meta-analysis. And again, until the last 20 years, we have not done this in the justice system very much. And actually, only through the implementation of drug courts have they really started to study the justice system and its practices. Why should we care? Because I submit that it will improve our outcomes, especially reducing recidivism. It will reduce victimization, prevent harm, enhance our collaboration amongst all of the justice system players. It will establish research-driven decision-making, and it'll target funding toward interventions with the greatest returns. And it saves money. These are a couple of examples in Texas and in Georgia of what happened with only minor changes to using more research-based decision-making. Unfortunately, in Wisconsin, we had the same opportunity through our Justice Reinvestment Initiative, And there were a group of legislators and other persons from the justice system, and I was fortunate to serve on this panel from 2008 to 2009. And we had the National Center of State Courts come in and study our system. And they made 4 recommendations to us about things we could do. They were low-hanging fruit. They didn't take a lot of work to make changes in our justice system so that we would wind up having this type of an outcome. We were looking at spending, if I recall correctly, somewhere in the vicinity of $5 billion additional dollars to build prisons and having our justice system increase significantly over the next 10 years. And what their proposals were would be sufficient to stop it, stop our growth right where we were. One of the 4 was enacted by the legislature in 2009. All of them were taken away in the last biennium's legislature. So those effective funding strategies, and they weren't funding strategies, they were strategies to reduce recidivism and yet hold people accountable, are gone, which I think was very sad. And this is something that we could have had in our state. Yes, sir. Question?
Do you have a handle on why that seems to be such a chronic problem in Wisconsin? I mean, what is it about Minnesota that they decided 30 years ago to change directions? And no matter what kind of efforts we seem to make in this state, it just gets worse and worse.
You know, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be in the legislature, I suppose. I don't. All I can say is, this is my own anecdotal sense, and there's no research that supports this, but it seems to me that people are just very worried about being tough on crime. And if you look at the laws that are proposed and those that are enacted, that seems to be an increasing tendency to criminalize a lot of activity and ratchet up the penalties related to it without providing any correlating treatment and rehabilitation. And if you do one without the other, you get this versus the Minnesota model. That's a very short answer, and it's only my personal opinion. I can't speak to that. And you do increase safety in the sense of the number of, for instance, the number of very severe crimes in this state has dropped, and dropped nationally in the last 10 to 15 years. But nonetheless, we still have rising prison populations for what are less violent and less criminal, what I would consider criminal offenses. People want to be safe and secure in their homes, and they don't understand all of the issues that drive those that commit criminal offenses, and they'd rather lock up and not deal with them. At least that tends to be the situation here. I don't know why Minnesota had the foresight to use a more restorative approach, and why Wisconsin hasn't.
Or Ohio, or Texas, or Georgia, or
Exactly.
all kinds of places.
Exactly.
California, even with their crazy prison population.
Well, they've been forced to do it, and frankly, part of what's going to force us to do it is we can no longer afford it. We can't continue to afford having an increasing budget for our Department of Corrections. It's now outpaced, or at least equal to, if I remember, all the higher learning in the state. We can't continue to do that. We can't continue to lock everybody up and throw away the key without treating them so they don't wind up going back there. And that's part of what I'm hoping we're going to accomplish with what we're trying to work on. The principles of evidence-based decision-making in the criminal justice system are to first assess risk and need, which is not something we have ever done until the last several years, at least as a judge, as a prosecutor, as a defense attorney, in law enforcement. We gauge and enhance motivation, which is probably something that you are all familiar with and have worked with. How many of you work in the criminal justice system, or have interned, or are involved in it? So a fair number of you. So you definitely are aware of what we do and don't do to some extent. We have to target interventions appropriately. We have to skill train, not just the people we're working with, but we have to be skill trained to know what we're doing. We have to provide positive reinforcement. How many of you think that judges provide positive reinforcement? We have to learn to do that. It's very important. We have to provide support in our natural communities. You can put somebody away for 3 years in prison, but when they come out, they're lost. They don't know what's going on, how to handle themselves. They've had everybody take care of everything for them for 3 years. They know how to deal with that environment, but they don't know how to deal with the environment outside. We need to measure our process. Is what we're doing working? If I have someone in the prison system for 3 years for a particular offense and they come out, how likely it is that they're going to reoffend? And what should I have ordered in lieu of that particular situation? And then finally, provide feedback. Tell me if what I'm doing is right or not. Now, I think that you might think it's kind of odd that there's resistance to this, and I will tell you there is resistance to doing this. I can tell you from the judicial perspective, there are a lot of judges who say to me, I don't want the press to know that my last 20 sentences have all been unsuccessful and that person has come out and 2/3 of them have reoffended. I don't want the press to know that. That's going to look bad for me. I'm not going to get reelected. And there are a lot of other people in the system who don't want that feedback necessarily because it could really impinge on their work. So there is some pushback in the justice system itself, setting aside treatment professionals. So what do we need to do? We talked first about measuring risk. And we have the risk principle, which is who should we be serving? The level of supervision or services should be matched to the risk level of the offender. You should be focusing on medium and high risk offenders. You should not be devoting your attention to low risk offenders. You should be paying less attention to low risk offenders because if you put them in lots of services with lots of other people who are medium and high risk, the medium and high risk people are going to rub off on the low risk person. The person isn't going to instill good values in the others, they're going to instill those negative values on the low-risk offender, and research has shown that, absolutely. In addition, putting too many services and requiring too much of low-risk offenders essentially gives them a ceiling effect. They're like, I don't need this, what the heck, and they give up, which is not what you want. So we shouldn't be paying as much attention to low-risk offenders. They need an intervention, and sometimes that intervention is the arrest, or the contact with law enforcement, or doing some community service, or paying a fine. I don't know about all of you in the room, but let me tell you, if I was arrested for drunk driving once, that would be way more than enough intervention for me, because I'd lose my license potentially, I would be subject to public scrutiny, I could lose my job. There's a whole host of other things that intervention would bring to me. The fact that they're going to potentially put me in jail or charge me a fine, really I could care less. That's where your low-risk offenders are. They have different needs than high-risk, yeah.
Do you find, I have an internship in Minnesota, and one of the groups that I help to run is for like women who have abused some sort of substance or chemical while pregnant or having small children. And a lot of them kind of say sometimes too, like, there's just too many expectations. Like Monday I have this group, Tuesday I have this group, Wednesday I have, something else. Somebody comes to my house for therapy on Thursday, like I have to work on Friday, and then I have my kids all weekend. So like a lot of times, they say like there's just too many things for them to do at one time, and they feel overwhelmed by that. And like, how am I supposed to work and provide for my family? How am I supposed to get off assistance or something to that nature? Do you find that even with low or high risk people, if you put too many things into place at one time, that doesn't really work either?
Yes, I think behavior change models would show that if you have too many expectations of anyone, low or high risk, at some point they're going to give up.
Right.
And so it's that difficult balance that you have to achieve, and unfortunately for each individual, which makes treatment so difficult, to try to figure out what's the proper dosage, so to speak, for that risk level. But you don't have too many expectations, so they give up, but not too low, so they get habituated, and it's not a big deal. Yes, and I can tell you there are persons in our drug court who feel the same way when they come in, because they've never had those expectations for a long time.
Well, it seems like sometimes, like, maybe it is some of the political pressures too, but you're supposed to like throw all these services at people so that you can fix what's happening. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily do anything.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And so again, the key and the difficulty is figuring out what to do when in what dosage, and over what period of time. Because you can only do, as you've experienced with the persons you work with, so much. And at some point they're like, I can never do this, I can never do it well enough, and I give up.
And not everybody needs to have the same path. I think that's a lot of times too, is everybody sort of gets the same things. Like you're all here for the same reason, so you get this package.
Absolutely.
And this is what we expect of you, and some of them don't need that.
So there are certain requirements in every program that everyone has to do, but within that, how they're provided over the length of time, again, the dosage, or additional things provided should be based upon each individual's need. That's tough. That's difficult to do. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but thank you. So first, with respect to the risk, and just to reiterate, we don't need to devote all the services to low-risk individuals. We should be treating medium to high-risk individuals and controlling those who are extremely high risk. Those are the people who we can throw services at all we want, but I think research is tending to show that we can make more of an impact than we originally thought, but still, if you have a limited number of resources, extremely high-risk offenders are probably not people for whom we should be providing those services. And at some point, you have to decide what services you're going to allocate and to whom. If you have limited resources, medium to high risk are those you should be concentrating on. And then, as you mentioned, the needs principle, what should we be doing? Targeting interventions for those, that should be for the offender characteristics that have the most effect on the likelihood of reoffending. And as you said, there isn't a cookie-cutter approach, absolutely. So in the criminal justice system, we talk about criminogenic needs, and there are the big four. The criminogenic needs are those factors that individually and in conjunction with one another influence the likelihood of committing an offense. And so these are the big four. Antisocial attitudes. Do you have empathy? Do you have remorse? Do you feel entitled? If you have none and you feel entitled, you have examples of antisocial attitudes. Antisocial friends and peers. Your mom was right. Who you hang out with is hugely important. Don't hang out with the bad kids because they're going to influence you, just like we talked about with respect to low-risk offenders. Antisocial personality patterns. Is the person impulsive, egotistical, narcissistic? Do they take a victim stance? And then family or marital factors have a huge impact. The nature of your relationships, support or lack thereof, nurturing or not. Do you have any trust with anyone? Have you ever had trust with anyone? How has that been breached? Are you in the midst of a divorce? Have you had your children removed from your care? All of those things significantly affect one's likelihood of criminal offending. And then there are four others, which are viewed as less impactful perhaps, but still very significant. And these four factors also affect one's likelihood, in conjunction with others, for criminal offense. And in our justice system, and particularly in the state of Wisconsin, where alcohol is huge, substance abuse is a major issue. If I recall correctly, we occasionally do evaluations of persons in the jail, and I know they did a snapshot evaluation in January of this year of all people in secure incarceration, and I think somewhere between, if I wanted to say 90%, 85 to 90% of them were there for substance abuse issues, were drunk or high at the time they committed their offense. It's a huge issue in our culture here in Wisconsin. Alcohol is by far the most abused substance. But these other things play into issues related to committing criminal activity. Now, there are some non-criminogenic needs. Anxiety or stress is no greater predictor of criminal activity or not. Low self-esteem is not. Intelligence or lack thereof is not. Health and physical conditioning is not. And mental illness is not. So there's a lot of unfortunately mentally ill people in our justice system versus our regular population. But in great measure, I think that's because we don't have a very good system of dealing with persons with mental illness here. No effective treatment that's affordable. And 25 or 30 years ago, perhaps longer, they kind of opened the doors for the institutions that cared for them and said, we're not going to do this anymore. We don't like what we've been doing in this setting. But it wound up putting them in the general society, which winds up having them because they don't conform necessarily to our standards, unusually numbered in our jail and prison populations. So we then have a risk needs assessment, which tells us what is a person's risk and what are their needs. And it is the engine that drives our evidence-based policies in our criminal justice system. And we use generalized and specialized tools. They are intended to inform but not replace professional judgment. One of the reasons we get pushback from prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges in the justice system is because we're saying, well, you give me a tool, it says they're high risk and they have these needs, so I'm a cookie cutter, I don't have any discretion. That's not the situation at all. It just helps us provide some information to make an informed decision. And it can be used at sentencing, and for me it should be used at sentencing to identify offenders who should be targeted for interventions and then identify dynamic risk factors to target with conditions of probation. So this gives me a little bit better tool to make an intelligent decision about whether a person should be incarcerated or not, what kind of programs or services that they should be receiving. There is a tool that we have started to roll out across the state of Wisconsin, which is very exciting. The Department of Corrections 2 years ago decided to purchase the ability to use this tool. And so every person who's placed on probation supervision or goes through the prison system has an evaluation under a compass. And I have a copy of one here. I don't have the beautiful colored one. It comes with colored bars and everything, but I don't have a color copier, so you'll have to bear with the black and white. But what it does is it sits down, a person sits down with an individual and asks them about 130 or 40 questions, if I recall. Thank you. You should probably be discussing it.
That's all right. I have to do them.
So it is one of many tools. There are many tools that you can use for risk needs assessment, but this is the one the Department of Corrections has decided to use across the state. Uniformity is a good thing. And then they're also going to be using it for case management, so that, again, it has a tool that they can work with to assist in setting up the programming and treatment that individuals need, tailored to the individual. So I think it's very exciting. Now, some people say, oh, the compass isn't the best or whatever. I don't care. I'm thrilled we've got the opportunity to use a tool. And what we have been doing in Eau Claire, we're a little bit ahead of the game, is we've had the opportunity to use this for a couple of years, and we use it in our jail. So when someone comes into our jail, they're first screened with what's called the proxy, which tells us their likelihood of flight. And then we get that information when we're setting bond. So I know if I should keep a person in jail because I think they're likely to flee, or if I shouldn't. That helps me make that decision. And then the prosecutor and the defense attorney, if the defendant is willing to undergo it, and it's a voluntary thing at that point, get a compass assessment. And it talks to them about their risks and their needs. I should probably have you explain it because you probably understand it better than I do. But generally speaking, there are, if I recall, 8 scales that are on this that talk about, one, the risk, the overall risk potential. This is a summary sheet on the front. And then the criminogenic needs scale. And this person would be considered relatively high risk and high need, because anything over about a 6 is pretty much high need, and anything over a 6 clearly is a high risk. And that's risk of violence, risk of recidivism is in the middle, and risk of failure to appear is the third one down. And then these criminal involvement, relationships, lifestyles, personality, attitudes, family, and social exclusion are those criminogenic needs that we talked about earlier. And then what happens is you can get a typology. Now, it doesn't say that the person who's been assessed is this person, but since this gives you an idea of the type of individual, looking at all the studies that we've had, and talks a little bit about what you can expect with respect to that individual. Each of the persons who administers the compass, let me back up. The compass is actually validated to the state of Wisconsin, so it looks at our persons who live here versus validated to Texas or California, which may have different issues. And then in each county, it's actually validated to the persons in our county. So the people who give it have had their results looked at and reviewed and validated for our population, which makes it even more of a greater assistance to us in using it. So in this case, this is a typical pattern for a socially isolated long-term substance abuse person. The average age is 35, 4 criminogenic problems, serious long-term substance abuse suggesting addiction proneness. It doesn't decide if they're addicted, but it tells you you should be thinking about getting that assessed. Extreme social marginalization, social isolation, poverty, unstable residence, poor social adjustment, boredom, lack of pro-social leisure activities, kinds of things that it talks to you about. And then there's a narrative summary that summarizes the answers to different types of the questions. And then ultimately, it looks at the criminogenic needs summary. So as an example, let's look at the criminal associates and peers. The score is highly probable 8. This is a person who would be considered high risk. They have few friends and associates. Let's see. He reports few of his friends and associates have ever been arrested. He reports half or more of his friends and associates regularly take drugs. Mr. Bad Actor reports few of his friends and associates have ever spent time in jail or prison. He's never been a gang member, but the other answers to his questions show that he's likely been having continuing involvement with antisocial friends and associates involved in crime, gangs, and other drugs. So we should be restricting his contact with current friends and associates. That will help minimize his current activity. How do we do that? What can I do to order to probation, supervision, jail, whatever, that I can try to start working on some of those issues? That's part of what it's telling you. It's a tool. It goes on to do this with the other criminogenic needs. It's provided to prosecutors and defense attorneys to help them negotiate in plea negotiations. It's provided to the judge at the time of sentencing to say, here, judge, this is what the compass shows, and this is why we've arrived at this joint recommendation. It's provided to us when they're arguing about sentence and they don't have a joint recommendation with a pre-sentence investigative report. And right now, the Department of Corrections is working on putting the compass information into that PSI, that pre-sentence investigative report, so wrapping it all together so we can better use it. And it's very exciting. I have to tell you, finally I feel like there's something that I have as a tool to help me make some decisions that I didn't have before. The next and final issue here of principles is a treatment and responsivity principle, which, as you talked about, is to select the treatment and the programming that best assists in changing the risk factors for an individual. And the most effective services in reducing recidivism we've seen are cognitive behavioral interventions that are based on social learning principles, which I'm sure all of you know. But as a judge who took Social Work 101 or Sociology 101, and that was it, I had to relearn the behavioral learning principles because I didn't know them. You know them intuitively, a little bit, raising kids, but it's not the same thing by any means, and you don't know why you do some of them, and I'm still learning them. And one of those, of course, is the carrot and the stick, which is huge in the justice system. We just talked a lot about sticks, punishment, but we don't do much with carrots. And I asked facetiously, how many judges do you think reward people? But seriously, it's a rare day when you get up and you are talking to somebody in a traditional sentencing setting and you tell them they did something good. And we need to start changing that. And of course, we need to develop sanctions that are appropriate and effective along with those rewards. So the basic behavioral learning principles are things that you all know about. We have to provide certainty as to what's expected of an individual. We have to provide celerity and immediate response. We have to make our responses appropriate and proportional. Too little, and we just went, Mr. Eisenberg is over there, a drug court coordinator, and I just went to a training and they talked about boiling the frog. You guys heard about boiling the frog? A few people are nodding their heads yes. I just thought this was so interesting. If you put a frog in hot water and it's boiling, it jumps out. But if you put the frog in tepid water and then you just slowly increase the heat, the frog will stay there because it becomes habituated to the warm water, and over time it will stay there until it pretty much boils. So it's boiling the frog. So if we're using our most serious sanction, let's say that's jail, to punish somebody, and we put them in for a very long time, they can't jump out, but I'll tell you, the next time we want to put them in jail, they're going to be used to it. It's not going to be a big deal to them. And I can tell you, people that I work with, when I say, well, you're going to jail and you're going to go there for 2, 3, or 4 weeks, they don't want to go, but it's not a big deal to them. Having to make changes in their behavior is a lot more difficult than going to jail. You should be able to, with your sanctions, decrease or increase them to match the response. And you should be able to be fair. You have to be proportional. You have to treat like people similarly, not the same, in similar circumstances. You have to provide procedural justice, give them advance notice about what they can expect if they violate. And then you have to punish appropriately the behavior, but not the individual. And that's very difficult to do as a judge. You did this and you did that, and the person is taking it personally. They should be listening to what you're saying, but it shouldn't be punishing the person. It's the behavior in which they engage. And rewards should be 4 to 1. That's how you're going to change behavior, by providing positive reinforcement, not all stick. And our justice system is great with sticks, and we have very few carrots. An example of this is truth in sentencing, and I'm going to get back to that again, because we had the opportunity under the law that was enacted before most recent legislation for persons with good behavior and with engaging in programming based on their assessment, their risks, and their needs. If they did it well, they could earn their opportunity to get out of prison and get 25% of the time off their sentence. It was called a risk reduction sentence. And it was one of the things that grew out of the Justice Reinvestment Initiative. And that 20% that they had off their sentence wasn't added to the extended supervision, so it really, truly did reduce the length of their sentence. They took that away in the last legislative change. And if you go to the prisons, and as a judge, I have to go to prison at least once a year to talk to people who are there, find out about their experience, because if I'm sending people there, I should know what I'm getting them into. And they will tell me, the wardens will tell me, that was a huge factor. People engaged in better behavior, and they were more motivated to engage in programming because they had that opportunity. And now, they don't. Now, they're not all acting out, but they have found far less engagement in programming because they don't earn anything other than the intrinsic reward of engaging in it. And many of them don't have those feelings of intrinsic reward. So, and a perfect example of what happens when you have no carrots and all stick. So, part of what we've been working on in the justice system is proper methods of helping do social learning. And I feel like I'm preaching to the choir because you probably all get up here and talk about this. But again, as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney and as a judge, I am great at advocating for my position. I am great at giving my decisions, hopefully, informing my opinions. But I am not good at any of this stuff because I've never been trained to do any of this stuff. And this is what I need to be doing. This is what our probation agents need to be doing. And of course, this is what our treatment providers need to be doing. But when I'm putting someone on probation and I'm sending them to drug and alcohol treatment, I have no clue if that drug and alcohol treatment provider uses evidence-based practices or not. What kind of dosage they provide. Do they do any cognitive behavioral work? I don't know anything about that. And I need to if I'm going to order people to be engaging in it. And I should be doing this. So I have started to learn to do this, and part of my opportunity to do that is through my drug court. I'm not necessarily engaged as a role model, so to speak, but there will be demonstrations, there will be role play. I will give feedback to participants. And I can tell you that it's very helpful. I also can tell you that research shows, particularly, I can give you the example in the drug court, that how judges interact with participants is a major impact in the success and their success. If a judge is, I wouldn't say nurturing, but supportive, shows they care, holds someone accountable, but also talks to the individual and works with that individual does far better than when they're in front of a judge who does the Charlie Brown rah, 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 rah situation. And they have studied this through drug courts because one of the 10 key components is the relationship between the judge and the participant is extraordinarily important. And they have found out actually it is one of the predominant factors for the success of treatment courts. And there's no reason why we can't be engaging in these type of situations every day on the bench. And so I've taken that research and started to do it in my child support hearings. And motivational interviewing is something else that we've begun to work on, which you probably all know about, but we never knew about, we never did, other than intuitively you wanted people to do better, but you didn't know how to encourage them to do that. So we've begun working on that as well, getting them to see the dissonance between what their goals are, what they're doing, and where they're going and want to be. All of that, juvenile hearings, perfect opportunity to use this type of work. And practically, frankly, almost any hearing where you have the time to engage in that, and certainly at sentencing hearings. And not just talk, but let people talk back to you appropriately and tell you what they think and how they feel and what they want, and listen to it. It's very, very important. So what doesn't work to reduce recidivism as far as sanctions go? Punishment, sanctions, or incarceration in and of themselves are shown to be ineffective at reducing recidivism, which again means rearrest or reconviction. Fear-based programs, physical challenge programs, boot camps, as an example, without treatment. Just putting someone in boot camp is not going to be successful. Boot camps with treatment have shown some success, but without, absolutely not. Intensive supervision without treatment, holding someone accountable but providing no other assistance is not shown to be effective. This isn't effective. What else doesn't work? Shaming. You may have seen many people who have had to hold up signs in front of businesses at which they've worked and from where they've stolen. It is not shown to be effective. The employer hates it. I mean, who wants someone to stand outside your business for 8 hours and have someone holding a sign up saying, I stole from this person, and the person who's involved in it is not discouraged from committing new offenses, they're just embarrassed. Drug education in and of itself is not effective. So we've had DARE programs for years in our schools, and they've done a great job at establishing relationships between young persons and law enforcement. But we've actually shown that educating the kids about drugs has increased their awareness in use, not decreased it. Drug prevention classes focused on fear or emotional appeal. Non-action oriented group counseling, just telling everybody, talking about how they feel about stuff, is not shown to be particularly effective. Bibliotherapy. I'm going to give you a book, read it, bring me back a report on it. In and of itself is not shown to be effective. Self-esteem programs. All you have is criminals who feel better about themselves. That isn't shown effective to reduce recidivism. And yoga and meditation. Now, you can feel great, and that doesn't mean people who are in your court shouldn't be doing yoga or meditation or exercising or getting, what's it when you put pins in, acupuncture. Those are all fine things to treat pain or to enhance one's physical abilities, but they aren't going to reduce recidivism. So, when we're talking about evidence-based practices in the justice system, we should be determining who should be provided with what level of supervision. We should assess offender risk factors through the use of actuarial risk needs, assessment tools, and professional judgment, not just how I anecdotally feel about things. We should avoid significant intervention with low-risk offenders, and we should target moderate to high-risk offenders. We should assess their criminogenic needs, target those criminogenic needs in a setting where there are conditions of probation or supervision. And the goal, of course, will permit us to utilize our limited resources for those who need them most and will most benefit from them. And they'll permit us to provide those resources more efficiently and more effectively. And that improves community safety and reduces recidivism. So, what changes are we making here in Eau Claire? And I have to tell you, I'm going to blow our horn for a minute, but in Eau Claire, we have been doing some unbelievable things. We received a grant, a federal grant, in Eau Claire and Milwaukee counties to envelop evidence-based decision-making and practices through our entire system. So from the first contact with law enforcement, they are deciding through community policing, do I need to arrest this person? Do I just talk to them and intervene? If I do arrest them, they do a proxy to assess their risk of flight. They take them in and they then make a decision based on all the factors and the nature of the offense, if they should arrest, book, and release, or if they should hold the person. Before any time you committed a particular kind of offense, you were held. Didn't pay any attention to the risks level of the offender, their likelihood of flight or anything, we just held them. And then if they release them, they give them an ordering date. And at least thus far, we haven't seen any significant difference as far as reporting goes. Then they give the judge the risk tool at the bench to decide about the bond. They have the compass assessment to assist in negotiation. They give the judge those assessments and others, sex offender risk assessments, maybe drug and alcohol assessments or others at the time of sentencing. The judge now has a list of programs which we've expanded for treatment in the community and on supervision through the Department of Corrections. And we know what they are, and we know what are research-based. And we can suggest things as conditions of probation, but we try not to tie our agents' hands because they're in a better position to manage that individual and provide the appropriate treatment at the appropriate time for that person rather than having us just do informally or something. And then the Department of Corrections uses that same compass analysis to form their case management plan and their supervision plan. It's a very streamlined, collaborative process where we work together, still have our adversarial system, constitutional rights are protected. No one's doing away with all those important things. But we're providing much more effective and efficient use of our resources for the appropriate people. And it's taken a long time. I think we've spent 2 years thus far working on this, and we've just begun implementing this. But we're one of 3 places in the United States that is doing this. We are the only place in the United States that's rolling it out across our entire system. And if we do, we will be a model for the criminal justice system, state and federal, in this country, which I think is unbelievably exciting. And so now we're going to be studying the effects of what we're doing to see if they make a difference or not. And we'll report back on that, and if they do, we will be encouraging others to do this and teaching them to do that. We've had Department of Corrections changes to screening, assessment, and case management, and I've talked a little bit about those. We've had what are called TAG grants across our state, and right now those have been significantly reduced because of budget cuts at the state level. But they were seed monies that were given to different counties, 6 counties in the state, to try to develop unique programs that were evidence or research-based to reduce recidivism. And I'm trying to remember which counties, Pat, you probably know better than I do. Pierce?
Pierce, Burnett, Wood, Rockland.
In Milwaukee, right. All received grants, and so they each implemented different programs and then studied them for several years. And many of them did treatment courts. Milwaukee did a diversion or jail program, and I'm sorry, I don't remember all the rest, but the idea was, and they would be examples of things that work, and then they would hopefully encourage other people to do the same thing. That's a little stagnant right now. We're waiting to see if any more funds become available to encourage that for other counties. We have treatment courts across our state. We had in 2002 2, and today we have 51. We counted them up in the last several days because we were at a treatment court professionals program for the state of Wisconsin. Very exciting. Here in Eau Claire County we have 4. We have the drug court, which treats multiple felony offenders who are addicted to drugs or alcohol. We have the AIM court, which is called Against Incarcerating Mothers. And it also treats that same type of population, but gender-specific and women with children. Part of the goal of that court is to keep those children at home with parents, because as you know, taking a child out of the home is extraordinarily detrimental to the person's development. And we have our Veterans Court, which is newer. Judge Schumacher runs the in court, Judge Gabler runs the Veterans Court, and that's set up to treat a multitude of different issues for people in the justice system, but it's to pair that individual with the resources available through the veterans system, which they have either been unwilling or unable to access. And so there are mentors who are assisting with that, and people from the Veterans Association or administration that come and help with that court. And finally, we have mental health court. We've just received a SAMHSA grant, which is listed right here, to assist with the mental health court, to expand it, to treat persons with different diagnoses than are available for treatment under the community support program. And so I'm thinking we'll have maybe 30 people in that court by the end of this year or early next year. And that treats people, we were laughing before we started. In my drug court, I do my best to try to keep people from using substances, and in mental health court, they try to get them to use substances. So it's a little bit different, but obviously they have many other needs besides that. And they are also working with people who are in the justice system to try to make sure that they take their medications and get the other appropriate treatment when needed and maintain them safely in the community. We just received a Justice Reinvestment Initiative grant in Eau Claire County, so we're also going to be using that with our EPPM initiative to start trying to make some changes that pinpoint things that we can do in the system to be more effective and efficient. We have in the state a group called the Effective Justice Strategies Group, which is a cross-system collaboration of people from Department of Corrections, the Judiciary, the Director of State Courts, different counties, coordinating councils, who are also working to try to propose changes statewide. We're hoping to get a statewide treatment court coordinator. And we have just recently gone through an initiative with the National Center of State Courts. And they've put out recommendations. If you go on their website, you'll be able to see their specific report about Wisconsin and its effective justice strategies and the recommendations for changes that we should be making here in Wisconsin. And by the way, I don't have a bibliography here for you to look at, but if you go to Office of Justice Assistant website, Bureau of Justice Assistants website, National Association of Drug Court Professionals website, National Center for State Courts website, NDCI website, you will find a plethora of information that is similar to what I've been giving you, and a lot more detailed analysis, a lot of the reports from the meta-analyses and the studies that have been done over the past 10 years. We also have our Criminal Justice Collaborating Council now on the statewide basis, which I'm so excited about. It's run by the Attorney General and the head of the Director of Secretary of the Department of Corrections, but it has on it representatives from the legislature, the courts, counties, the various secretaries from the Departments of Human Services, Veterans Affairs, Education, Administration. It'll have law enforcement representatives, so it is truly a collaborative effort on a statewide basis to try to dictate policy to hopefully make some of those changes that Minnesota made long ago and start bringing some of those things here. And we on the local level have a Criminal Justice Collaborating Council that also helps supervise all of these efforts. And then finally, one of the things we mentioned is the goal of sentencing, restorative justice program. There are several throughout the state. We have one here in Eau Claire County that's been operating since 2002. It generally provides assistance to juveniles, but we're expanding it and trying slowly to expand it to work with adults. They do victim offender conferencing, which provides an opportunity under supervised setting for an offender to talk with the victim about what they did. They get to talk to each other, hopefully restore some of the trust lost, repair the harm, develop a repair plan if that's appropriate. We have workshops for young people who don't have a direct victim. Maybe they're addicted to drugs or alcohol. Maybe they did a retail theft. We also have mentoring in our schools to help kids stay in school, one-on-one direct mentoring. So what can you do? Aside from all the wonderful work you can do in your different jobs, which of course is terrific, and individually you really can make a difference. with every person you've been involved with. But make your vote count. When you're talking to people about who you're voting for, look at the people who are looking at what research shows, what works best, what are best practices, not looking at people who are just tough on crime. By the way, this use of evidence-based practices is not soft on crime. If you'll ask people who are in our drug court, for instance, one of the motivators for them to come into our court was they didn't want to go to prison. I get that. You can coerce treatment. You can coerce people to be involved in your programming, at least initially. But they will tell you that in some senses it's a lot easier just to spend the time in jail or prison than it is to do all the stuff you've got to do. Like you were talking about with those women, they're just like overwhelmed at first. And to make the changes that you need to make to stay clean and sober when that's been your life and you're addicted to drugs or alcohol is a phenomenally difficult task. And sometimes it's just easier to go to prison and not have to deal with it. So I respect and admire their willingness to be involved. And it's a voluntary decision in our court. But my point is, sometimes it's just easier to give up and take what would be the, not for us, but for them, an easier way. You can join Jonah or TIP on a local basis. They are somewhat faith-based, but they're encouraging reduction in our prison population. And I think TIP has a program out now that we're trying to, it's called 11 by 15. They're trying to reduce our prison population by half by 2015. I think they may be a little bit aggressive in their analysis, and I don't know how they chose those numbers, but I'm all for that as long as those people are treated appropriately and safely in our communities. Excuse me. And you can, in addition to all the wonderful things you do in your jobs, volunteer to work with Restorative Justice, Community Table, Sojourner House, Bolton Refuge House, our drug court, or our treatment courts. You could be a mentor at Veterans Court. So there are a lot of opportunities to do other things in addition. So, 2 other things you can do. Work to change people's attitudes and hire and rent people who've had criminal backgrounds. Sounds easy, but if you're in a position, think about that. Take the lead, if that's what you think it is. It makes a big difference for people who can't find jobs and who can't rent it.
Why do you think there's a difference between adult corrections expanding and juvenile corrections reducing in the state of Wisconsin? And do you have any thoughts about that or what's happening there?
Well, I think I can't tell you exactly because I haven't looked at any research about it, but I think there are 2 pressures to reduce the juvenile corrections. First of all, juvenile populations as a whole in the correctional system are reducing. In part, that's because the proportional numbers of youth are going down as a percentage of the population. Second of all, monetarily, it's extraordinarily expensive to keep youth in any out-of-county facility like Lincoln Hills. And so there's been a great push because of that significant expense to keep youth out of county situations. I think that the philosophy of youth corrections is rehabilitation and restoration. The philosophy of adult corrections is punishment. And so when you're looking at restoration and rehabilitation, as we talked about, maintaining people in their natural communities is more effective. And I'm not sure if it's occurring because they're looking at research or not, but they're going along with what the research shows by reducing that corrections population out of county for youth. If you can maintain them close to their families, appropriate friends, their support mechanisms, continuing their education without being disrupted, they're going to do much better than if you take them and put them with a whole bunch of other people who are bad actors. So I think that's been a lot of the philosophy and the reasons for the reduction in the juvenile population. And in the adult population, I just think that, again, this is all anecdotal and it's my personal opinion, but our society is becoming more risk averse. And if you have a problem or an issue, I don't want to hear about it, I don't want to know about it, you deal with it yourself, and if you can't, we're going to put you somewhere where you can. And so more things are being criminalized. The nature of the offenses are being ratcheted up. I mean, I get the Wheeler report and I look every day at the proposed legislation, and they're constantly ratcheting up the sanctions and the number of things that are criminal in nature. All of that contributes to increasing the adult population. It's not research-based, but that's about the best answer I can give you. And I assume you all heard the question, which is how do you explain the difference between the juvenile and the correction system going down, population-wise, and the adult going up, or at least maintaining.
Yeah, I guess I was more just curious, I mean, is it philosophical or is it financial, and maybe it's both?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
I think it's both. Is there another question over here? Yes.
I teach over at Green Bay Correctional, and one of the things I do besides classroom teaching is that I coordinate a program that brings kids, juveniles from the surrounding areas who are getting in trouble and have the attention of local juvenile justice and social service agencies to come in and talk to some of the inmates, volunteer inmates, in a controlled environment about what happens when you continue down this path. You know, I was you when I was 12 years old, look where I am, that kind of issue. And we try to use some issues of restorative justice, you know, trying to help them be aware of who they're affecting and harming and so on and so forth. But we're always facing this headwind from various places about, this doesn't work, this is useless, waste of time. And I'm sort of, you know, I have this blind, unreasoning faith that it will help somebody, somewhere. One of these kids will change based on what he has experienced as they come into the prison. Am I nuts? Am I completely misguided? Do you think those things are a waste of time?
Now, I wanted to be sure I understood the beginning part of what you said. Do you bring youth from the community into the prison to give them
Yeah,
this?
they come and visit the prison, spend 2.5, 3 hours primarily interacting with inmates who have volunteered to sort of be mentors and so on with this.
Okay.
It used to be sort of a scared straight sort of problem or program, and you know, it's very obvious scared straight didn't help at all. And I've been working real hard to mellow it out. So it's more, let's have a conversation about what happens when you do these things. Let's find a way to connect kind of on a different level of, you know, sharing experiences, talking circle kind of thing. And I know it helps the inmates who are involved. But we can't get any kind of information or data because they're juveniles about whether they've really changed. We get sort of anecdotal feedback from the counselors and so on that bring them in. But we have no numbers we can put on a table anywhere to justify what we're doing.
Okay. My response would be, and that was, the first part was what I was worried about, was the scared straight kind of thing. But when there's a constructive dialogue that isn't intended to well, my understanding is scared straight doesn't work because the people that come in there are young people, look at the people in prison, and many of them want to emulate them. They think it's cool. They think it's a good place to be. So that's why scared straight doesn't work, because again, the negative influences outweigh the positive influences or the scaring tactics. But when you're actually having them sit down with inmates and get to know them one-on-one and have the person that they might want to emulate or they might be interested in achieving the same type of thing, talk about the direct detriment, how it's impacted their lives. If those persons do it well, have appropriate conversations, don't build up or create this fantasy about how cool it is to act out in that fashion, but really get at the issues, I think it probably would have a positive effect, similar to what we talked about with restorative justice program and the accountability workshops. They do the same type of thing. What were your choices? How could you have done things differently? What are the consequences of your behaviors? Those are proven to work. Now, part of it would be how well those inmates are taught. so to speak, or selected to interact, to pick the appropriate people. And you could still do anonymous exit interviews or exit surveys, and you could still follow those kids if you can get some basic information and releases for 2 or 3 years to see if there's a reduction in recidivism versus the others. We do it in our restorative justice program through releases all the time, and we see if we've made an impact after 1, 2, and 3 years through a reduction in recidivism versus the control group. So there are some things you could do, but my answer is yes. I think if it's done appropriately and there's some control as to what they're discussing and how they're doing it, it could definitely have a positive effect. Just the scared straight part of it, no.
How do you kind of weigh out the rehabilitation and timelines versus permanency for kids?
That's a very difficult situation. What the question was in CHIP's cases in particular, how do you weigh out the rehabilitation and services, usually the parents, versus the need for permanency for a child, which under law is between 15 and 22 months. And that's a difficult thing. Again, and you probably know this better than I do, but what I've been taught is the research shows that if the child is significantly bonded to a parent, and the parent's making some progress, and it seems that reunification is likely, I would say that we tend to weigh more strongly on permitting that parent to continue toward reunification and working with that child, even if you run into that 15-month barrier. That in part depends on the age of the child and, of course, the nature of that bond. If it's an extraordinarily young child with virtually no bond, even if the parent's making progress, if it's limited, you may not continue to pursue reunification. If, on the other hand, the person is older, 10, 12, 13, they're not likely to want to be adopted or do well in an adopted setting, and they have a close bond with their parents, you may never terminate the rights. It's a difficult situation, and frustrated by your desire to want the parent to do something, and how do you motivate that person to get involved with that? What we try to do in our system here in Eau Claire is have the same judge handle all the cases related to a family. So it doesn't happen so much in the criminal world, but if I'm the judge who has a CHIPS case and the criminal case, I can work then to, in my sentencing, order things that are going to help that person deal with their criminal issues but not interfere with the CHIPS case. And I will try to do that if I can do that. And I think that makes a ton of sense, and that's where that cross-collaboration that I mentioned earlier can really make a big difference. There's a lot of cases where the criminal order works at cross purposes, or the child support order works at cross purposes, or the family court order works at cross purposes with the juvenile or CHIPS case. And we have to stop that. It doesn't make any sense. So, does that help? Okay. Well, the impact on children in the criminal justice system is known. And that's one of the things I talked about, the detriments is the dividing families. The problem is, when you're sentencing, you are told about the family. And we know that family situation is one of those top 4 criminogenic needs. But we don't, at least to date, haven't done a lot in sentencing that really takes into consideration the needs of family members. Our primary focus is on the defendant in a criminal setting. And while we know what we have to start doing and what we haven't done, and part of the evidence-based or research-based movement is to consider that, because it's one of the major criminogenic needs. How can we use that family as a motivator? And you know, especially for moms, but certainly probably no less for dads. Children and the desire to be with them is a huge motivator to get them to want to make change or to start to make change. So if we can order something that will facilitate that and encourage that ongoing relationship in appropriate situations, we will. The problem is, I might get a pre-sentence report that says, you know, this person, it tells me all about their background, how old they are, when they had their kids, who they've lived with, their financial support, their residential stability. It'll tell me they have so-and-so kids and where those kids are, but I don't know anything else about them. So I don't get any information to tell me, is this a strong bond, a nurturing relationship? How many times have those children been in and out of the home already? I don't get to factor in that information in my decision making. So I have to make certain assumptions about the fact they have children, how old they are, their gender, where were they living at the time of the arrest, and then decide for myself if that's going to impact things. The answer to your question is it should. The fact that they have family, they have children, that this is disrupting their family should make a difference, but it's one of the factors that's weighting with everything else in making that ultimate decision. And I'm hoping it will be considered more and more because, as we talked about, disruption to the family and lack of stability enhances criminalization. You know, there's other things that we can do. For instance, if someone's preparing a pre-sentence investigative report, if there was some way that they could know that there's a CHIPS action pending, and they could talk to that social worker, and they could access information from all the reports and the evaluations that have been done in that CHIPS case, that would provide great information to the judge and probably the defendant, as well as the prosecution, in making decisions in what they're going to recommend for a sentence and what we're going to make our decision for. The problem is, of course, there's those barriers between the juvenile and the criminal justice system that don't permit that sharing of information very much. Unless sometimes I'll get a defense attorney asking me in a juvenile case to permit them to have access to a CHIPS file. But that doesn't happen very often. I can tell you when I have big bond decisions, I ask about the family. Do you have children? Where do they live? With whom do they live? Do you take care of them? That's a factor in stability for me to know if that person can safely be in the community or not. Not everybody does. It depends on the particular person. But again, advocating or providing that information to someone who doesn't ask about it could be very helpful. So it's just it is a matter of education. It really is. A lot of the criminal activity is related to alcohol or drug consumption because part of the status of many of the offenses, the use or possession of any illegal substance, the use of alcohol and operating a motor vehicle by themselves create a situation where a lot of crimes are related to the use and consumption of substances. My understanding is, I said, our snapshot in the jail would have shown 85 to 90% of the people were there for drug or alcohol-related crimes on that particular day here in Eau Claire County. My understanding is somewhere between 75 and 80% of the people in the prison population in the United States on any given day are there because they are addicted to drugs or alcohol and they committed their crime to get them, or they use them, or were in possession of them. So it's a huge factor. And we need to treat better people who are addicted to drugs or alcohol in and out of the prison system. I believe it has that treatment an effective long-term treatment, not just a 28 stay at an inpatient facility and then you're out, but the research shows effective long-term treatment with high dosages up front for people who are addicted and then tapering as they are doing better with that treatment and better able to deal with their urges and the other issues they deal with is most effective. So again, I am not an expert in treatment, but I can tell you that there is a significant move to provide more effective long-term treatment in the justice system. The problem is, and people say to me all the time, how do you get this person in front of you who has 5 or 6 OWI offenses? And I say, because until you hit, now 4th, but until you hit 5th, there's never any mechanism to provide anybody with effective treatment. You have to undergo a drug and alcohol assessment, follow-up, which might mean doing a driver safety plan or 8 to 12 weeks of some group or some individual counseling, and that's it. And then you can reinstate your license after the requisite period of time. You don't have to do any treatment to get your license back. You have to pay huge fines, and you lose your license. And I can't tell you how many people drive every day without a valid license, so that's not a particularly effective deterrent. And for those for whom it is, they lose their jobs and their ability to care for their families. So we're creating a system where we're punishing people for the use and consumption of alcohol in a completely ineffective and unproductive way. And what we should be doing is diverting those resources and that expenses to providing assessment and appropriate treatment up front. And we would have a lot less people with 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th OWI offenses, in my opinion. And, you know, behavioral change models, and again, this is something we're working on the last couple of days, but people who are abusers and not addicted have to be treated differently than people who are addicted. Because people who are abusers can stop. They're capable of stopping. And we have to provide the appropriate sanctions to get them to stop. And usually, for those who are abusing and not addicted, that intervention of an arrest, a fine, potentially a conviction, and all that goes with that, loss of license, loss of professional license is enough after 1 or 2 times. People for addicted, that's not going to do a darn thing. Yes?
I'm just wondering what you're hearing statewide in regards to various criminal justice systems assessing and then providing the treatment for individuals involved in the justice system that have been exposed to trauma.
Just starting, you know, Clare County, again, through our SAMHSA grant in particular, we've just started to be able to access the TREM, T-R-E-M model of treatment. And I don't know, having attended that Wisconsin Association of Treatment Court Professionals meeting in the last week, there was a lot of discussion about that there, where other places in the state are starting to recognize that that is something that has to be dealt with to effectively treat people in the justice system. I don't know to what extent there are treatment programs out there or it's being provided on a significant basis. In Eau Claire County, we are starting to have it available to people who are in our treatment courts within the next month.
Well, as far as understanding why the system doesn't work, as well as what they can do to help make changes in their own individual positions or with the persons for they work, depending on if they're in the justice system or related to the justice system, they can start to look at whether they're using research-based practices or they're just doing things anecdotally, how they can incorporate those practices in what they do individually, dealing with their own clients or in their own work environment, how their work environment can collaborate with others to provide more information, better communication, again, using more research-based practices. That's what I'm hoping they'll take away from this. Some of the people that were here raised their hands. Many, I would say probably a third of them raised their hands that they're in the or involved with the justice system. They can see one-on-one how they can incorporate these research-based practices into what they're doing and better communicate what they're doing to other people who are making decisions.